And pulling all these off one after another of films that you do, you use a lot of the same department heads. You're kind of like Clint Eastwood that way. He never makes a movie unless he's
You know,
made.
that's the first time I've ever been compared to Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, he loves
I'll
his.
go with that.
Yeah, he loves his crew. You know, he
Yeah.
loves
No,
knowing.
I love my crew, and they're like my family, you know. And if people talk about a Joe Wright film, they're talking about a collective of people.
First he has too much art, and then not enough.
You're jealous.
Me?
It's fascinating. You're both brilliant, but exact opposites in style. Christian is overt, passionate, fiery.
Whereas I?
You are coded, witty, rueful.
Coded?
His words aren't better than yours, just differently put. But both are endlessly quotable.
You know his letters by heart.
Everyone. You will arrange the meeting.
As ever, I am at your service.
Welcome, Joe Wright.
Thank you, Pete. Lovely to be here. Nice to see you.
And congratulations again on Cyrano, which is just a terrific film. And I loved right from the beginning, I think I might have told you this, seeing the MGM lion roaring in front of another musical again, because MGM was the house of musicals during the golden era.
Yeah, it felt like the right home for the movie. And I think, frankly, I think the studio is on the up and up and are doing extraordinary things. They really believe in the theatrical experience, and for me, that's where I want to be.
So what was it about this? How did you discover it? It was on the Goodspeed Playhouse and different places this production had been playing. Peter Dinklage actually was in it with Haley Bennett.
I was invited by Haley to go and watch the first night of the first staged workshop up at the Chester Theatre in Connecticut, which is a tiny little theatre, seats 120 people. I went along knowing the story and loving it, not expecting though to want to make it as a movie. And there was this performance, you know, that Peter Dinklage's portrayal of Cyrano created a electric kind of atmosphere. I think it's something about the authenticity with which he plays it without the nose. You know, he brings a lifetime of experience to the role. What Pete brought to it was an incredible heartbreak and an intimacy, and something about the relationship between him and Haley, who's an incredibly emotionally available actor, and his kind of defense, his fear of intimacy, felt profound and something that would work brilliantly on screen. It's something that it felt very personal.
You, like Steven Spielberg this year with West Side Story, had never in your career done a movie musical.
No. And I've never been a huge fan of movie musicals either, Pete. I kind of, you know, I mean, especially the kind of 90s and 80s ones. I never liked the music, but I'm a huge fan of The National. And I saw the possibility of a new kind of musical, a kind of more contemplative, less declamatory musical. You know, there was something full of yearning and kind of poetic complexity in their music. So to that end, all of the singing was recorded live on set. So
not the usual. That is not the usual way.
No. But there was, because I wanted to embrace the faults. I wanted to embrace the cracks in the voices, because it seemed to me that the humanity lay there. I wanted this idea that you could move from speech into song in a single breath, and that it would feel entirely natural.
And it does. That's really hard to do because there's a lot of people out there that don't like movie musicals because the action stops and then they just break into song and it doesn't seem to have the continuity in so many cases. In some it does, but in a lot of them it doesn't. And here it just seems so natural.
I think that also comes from the choreography. The choreographer Sidi Larbi Shakawi and I first met making Anna Karenina, and then we worked on the stage together and in London. And he's someone I've learned a lot from. And so scenes like the Whispering Gallery, where Christian and Roxanne start at one end of the circle and then separate. And then join again at the other end. That's not dance, that's not choreography, but it has a relationship with the choreography, so that there's a kind of seamlessness between speech and song.
You mentioned the nose, which every production and everything I've ever seen, even Steve Martin's Roxanne, in here the joke is the nose. It's all tied to the nose. This is the first time I've seen that like that, and the casting of Dinklage is so perfect, because you don't miss the nose at all.
I mean, before the pandemic happened, the film for me was about looking for the similarities between us as humans rather than the differences, right? And the world seemed to be going in this direction where it was all about difference. They're different from me, you're different from me. This kind of isolationism that seemed to be spreading globally. And I felt that the film could possibly be a kind of defiant, passionate stance against that. And obviously then the pandemic happened and we were isolated for 4 or 5 months and got the script to a point where we were happy with it. And so it felt more urgent than ever to make a movie that was about human connection. And the difficulties of human connection.
Isn't that a theme sort of that's always interested you in your films? That theme of finding a way to get together and with characters. I think it is.
And how difficult that is, how problematic that is. But I think that's probably a theme of drama throughout history. Is human connection. How do we achieve that?
You shot this in the pandemic. I have been talking to a lot of people about their pandemic stories. This was really one of the first, and it was one of the high wire acts, I think, of the pandemic, because you went with a big crew of cast and crew, something like 300, and went to Italy and shot this all on location.
Yeah, I was determined to shoot a movie on location again. The past sort of 3 movies had been mainly shot in studios. Yeah. And so I really wanted to be back in the world, especially after lockdown. So yeah, it was about 100 people, 150 crew and cast, and then you added the supporting artists, so it reached 300 on certain days. And we, there were obvious hurdles to overcome, but I think one of the problems, one of the things we do is to find solutions to problems. How do we overcome the problem of staging this scene in such a tight space, or how do we overcome the problem of only being allowed 120 extras for a big theater scene, for instance, at the beginning of the movie? And so Sarah Greenwood, the designer, and I built the set so that it would feel like it was busy. We built the set to the number of extras we were allowed. And then I had my mum, who's a prop maker and puppeteer, make 160 leather comma dell'arte masks, so the background extras could wear masks and keep each other safe.
Wow. And you had big sequences. The war sequence, for instance, looked like it would be incredibly challenging to shoot, at least the way it comes off on screen, the way I'm looking at it.
That was one of the most difficult sequences I think I've ever had to shoot, not least because a week before we were due to start up Mount Etna, a huge dump of snow fell, burying our set and making it completely inaccessible. And so this set that we'd built, and we'd built a platform, and that was the one sequence that we'd brought in a techno crane for, so that we designed the whole thing to be able to be shot off one crane, and then it was, as I say, totally inaccessible, and we had to improvise the entire sequence at 8,000 feet, so the air was still very thin, but only using a tripod. And it was kind of terrible and wonderful at the same time, you know. It made one think harder. It's like you can't rely on these big pieces of kit. You have to just bear things down to the essentials, you know. And how are we telling the story most economically? And then on the last day, the volcano erupted.
Of course, why not?
Yeah. So that was the end of that. We picked up our camera cases and ran from the back of Mount Etna with lava spitting at us as we ran.
A lot of your movies, you don't have the level of fluid camera work that I saw in this movie. The camera is really a character here, the movement of the camera, I think.
Well, it's actually quite deceptive because the camera isn't moving very much. The characters are moving, so the choreography is designed to create illusion. Yeah, to create the illusion.
Did you shoot this in sequence, or did it just appear?
Pretty much. Yeah, we shot. I always try and shoot in sequence as much as possible.
You mentioned the National, and I want to clarify. The National is the name of a band or a group. The Desner brothers, who wrote all the music, and then you had a husband and wife team who wrote the lyrics here. But the National is a group, and it's an unusual kind of thing, although they're doing a lot of movies. I see Desner is really involved in a lot of scoring now. The
Desners are extraordinary artists. They're very different. Bryce is more classical, kind of modern composition, minimalist composition, works with orchestras more. Aaron Dessner just produced the last two Taylor Swift albums, and so is more kind of folk pop, possibly, more the songwriter, if you like. And so it was very interesting working with those two disciplines and those two backgrounds, because one could always return to Bryce's extraordinary arrangements and emotive scoring, and then Aaron's kind of songwriting hooks could carry us through the so-called musical numbers.
Yeah, I have to ask you about the balcony scene, because if anything's familiar with Cyrano, it's the famous balcony scene, and that was really well shot too. I mean, because I've seen the balcony scene a few times in other Cyranos here. So was that a particular challenge here to make that unique?
It was. I don't often kind of carry the burden of previous productions, or the weight of a literary masterpiece too heavily on my shoulders, but I must say that scene had a certain pressure. Because it was so famous, and I loved the Gerard Depardieu film, and I'd loved Roxanne, and so I was nervous of it. But as I often find when I'm location scouting, a specific place will unlock the potential for a scene, and that just simply that wall with that window behind, right, and the ability to use a split diopter so that Cyrano and Roxanne are in the same frame connected together, rather than him underneath the balcony, as is usual. That kind of unlocked that scene. And then also we kind of controversially discussed how much Roxanne really knew what was going on. Mm-hmm. And that gave us a little twist on the scene as well, because in previous iterations, she's been completely unaware, you know, and completely fooled by Christian's voice suddenly taking on a completely different, you know, dropping 2 octaves.
Well, Joe Wright and company have produced another one. Jeff, you got to see this movie, and it's going. I love the way MGM actually and UAR, the releasing arm, is bringing it out into the world. It qualified for the Oscars in December, and now in January, it's opening slowly and then going wider towards the end of the month, and you know, that allows word of mouth, and that's a great way to release something that is more challenging than Spider-Man. You know.
I hope it works.
Don't we all? And especially for musicals, which I love musicals, and I want to, and to get the adult audience back into theaters, see this in a theater if you can, because it's very special, visually stunning.
It's not just the big screen, it's the big sound.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
that's the thing about cinema. It's the big sound experience.
You got to have it. You got to have it. It makes such a difference. So keep carrying on the good fight, Joe Wright, and thank you for joining us on Behind the Lens today.
Thank you.